All right, today is October 11th, 2023. I'm recording this at 10:30 a.m. Central Time. Let's talk about what's going on with the Israeli war with Hamas. The most recent estimates that I've seen put out put the Israeli death toll from the Hamas attack at 1,200, with an additional 2,700 wounded. Now, the reason that number continues to increase, we're going to get more into this in a second, but as Israeli forces continue to clear some of these areas that the Hamas fighters took over on October 7th, they're finding more and more bodies. So these people were considered missing for a period of time, and then as they are recovered, the death count continues to increase. Israel has continued their strikes all across Gaza over the last 24 hours. The Gaza Ministry of Health recently listed their death toll inside of Gaza at 1,055, with another 5,284 total wounded. There are still known to be hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza, many of which are believed to be dual citizens. Again, not clear on the total number here. I've seen dozens thrown around loosely, on the high side as many as 100. Not clear how many people are actually there, as well as the nationalities of those being held. Additionally, the United Nations reported earlier today that 260,000 people have been displaced in Gaza, which amounts to roughly 10% of the population. Now, because Gaza is closed off, if you remember from a conversation yesterday, the Israeli defense minister talked about shutting off everything, shutting off water, food, electricity, every access into and out of Gaza. Those displaced people are going to be internally displaced, right? So they're not exiting to Egypt or into Israel, but just moving throughout areas inside of Gaza, likely outside of Gaza City itself. Now, I wanted to throw a couple recommendations out there for anybody interested in learning more about this conflict. There were a few podcasts I listened to recently I thought were really good, gave a lot of background and context as to what is going on here. There were two on Generation Jihad and another that came out on War in the Rocks. I'll list both of those in the description below. Now, this is something I feel like is at risk of getting some pretty negative backlash, but to me, it's important to make this point of clarification. There were reports coming out yesterday that Hamas had beheaded Israeli children as some of these villages were being liberated or cleared of remaining Hamas fighters. I saw it spreading all across social media, a lot of people wanting to see comments on that or videos about that, addressing that issue. More information has come out on that front, and there was a reporter on the scene that said he has not seen evidence of that. Fortunately, which is a good thing, right? We don't want that to happen. He said he's not seen any evidence of that happening, and the official military statements from Israel did not mention that at all. And when they start talking to the reporters that this came from, it's always a case of somebody heard it from somebody else. They're not able to visually confirm that this happened, which, again, it's a positive thing that atrocity, that type of atrocity did not occur. The reason I feel like there could be some backlash there is trying to recognize the fact that atrocities did occur and some horrible things did occur to children included. But this specific piece got a lot of traction yesterday, and as of now, it looks like that might not be accurate. Now, continuing on, the ground incursion, ground invasion by Israeli forces into Gaza has not yet begun. It does look like there's sorted reports that another 60,000 Israelis have been mobilized, which would put the total number at around 360,000 total that have reported for duty in the Israeli Defense Forces following the Hamas attack on October 7th. One of the reasons that offensive is not kicked off, which, look, all evidence points to that happening sometime here in the near future. It's just hard to imagine after what happened and mobilizing this many people with the movement of military equipment that Israel's not going to go into Gaza. But one of the reasons that hasn't taken place yet is Israel had to clear all of these areas where Hamas fighters had infiltrated. There were some areas where they had breached the fence with explosives, other areas where they had dug tunnels into Israeli territory. And as Israeli forces were moving through, it took a long time to clear all of these areas of the Hamas fighters and ensure that that border fence is secure and there's not any more still creeping across. Now, that doesn't appear to be completely done. Over the last 24 hours, there have been the occasional reports of continued crossings and Israeli forces getting into firefights with Hamas fighters. But that ongoing cleanup, that securing of the border region is one of the reasons that Israel's not gone in. They want to make sure that's all buttoned up before they press forward. Now, the Israeli Defense Force, in some of their updates, is already talking about a three-front war. We mentioned this a bit yesterday. The three fronts they're suggesting here, maybe even four in a sense, is the fighting that is looking to kick off in Gaza. There has been some violence in the West Bank, and just over the last few days, there were anti-tank rounds, anti-tank rockets, I think they referred to them as, being fired from Lebanon into Israel. There were also some fighters supposedly moving across the border region. It looks like those were from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and not necessarily Hamas, not necessarily Hezbollah. But of course, there's an argument that anything that happens in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah is going to know about. So they had to have at least been aware, if not facilitated that. So again, the three fronts, you've got Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon with Hezbollah. And then yesterday there were reports that rockets or at least artillery rounds were fired from Syria into Israel. Now, it's not clear, and Israel has said they don't know yet who fired those rounds from Syria into Israel, which I guess if we're looking at this would potentially be a four-front war. Syria and Lebanon both up there in the general north of the country. But if any rounds were fired from Syria, it's likely, or I shouldn't say likely, there's a strong possibility that's coming from some of the Iranian allies involved in the ongoing Syrian civil war, as opposed to the Syrian government themselves. But gotta wait for confirmation on that. Just after recording, information started coming out about an air infiltration in northern Israel from Lebanon and potentially even Syria. It's a mixed bag right now. It's ongoing. Some are referring to it as a wave of drones, others saying that there are personnel included, maybe in hang gliders like we saw Hamas use during their attacks a few days ago. If accurate, if this air infiltration is true, it likely marks the entrance of Hezbollah into the current war. As it relates to U.S. actions and response to the ongoing war, the United States sent one carrier strike group to the eastern Mediterranean, and there is conversation that they might send another. Now, the reason that those strike groups, or the one and maybe the two are going to be there, are to serve a couple purposes. One is to deter Iran from any aggression or escalation of this conflict, and another could be very much just the pre-positioning of resources should the United States decide to evacuate their civilians from Israel or anywhere else in the general region. Now, those carriers might be there to try to deter Iran, but in all likelihood, if Iran aimed to escalate this conflict, it would not be the Iranian Air Force flying overhead, firing missiles, things like that. For a long time now, the way that Iran has carried out foreign policy across the Middle East has been through some of their proxies. They have proxies in Lebanon with Hezbollah, Hamas in Gaza, multiple factions in Syria, as well as Iraq. And in all likelihood, it's those groups that would carry out some sort of attack to escalate this fight in a sense, as opposed to the direct Iranian government, which makes it a challenge. I mean, that's how Iran has done this for a long time. We had a hard time containing that when we had boots on the ground in Iraq and Iran was escalating through some of their proxies there. It's going to be a similar challenge here. An aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean is not going to stop some of those proxies from carrying out further operations. Now, there have been reports that a U.S. plane has already landed in Israel with additional military aid. So it looks like, this is pretty vague in terms of what was sent, but it looks like air defense missiles, some ammunition, nice and broad, don't know what that actually means, as well as small diameter bombs. So probably 250-pound bombs or smaller, GPS guided, that could really be well suited for a dense urban fight like Israel is looking to get into in Gaza. Additionally, it looks like existing Israeli military orders from the United States are being pushed forward, being expedited to try to get some of that equipment to Israel even sooner. Now, this is, of course, going to bring up the argument of different types of military aid to different countries. Will what we're sending to Ukraine affect what we can send to Israel and vice versa? Somewhat, maybe, not in the very short term. Both countries are going to be asking for and have asked for additional air defense ammunition. However, Israel is going to be much more focused in the near term, I would expect, on air-delivered munitions. So things like Hellfire missiles, rockets, GPS or laser-guided bombs. Those are things that we're not sending to Ukraine just because Ukraine does not have the platforms to put those into use. Conversely, Israel does not appear to be in desperate need of tanks, armored personnel carriers, and dumb artillery rounds, 155 unguided munitions, which those are very much front and center in terms of what Ukraine is asking of the United States right now. But that's all I got for now. I will link the podcast episodes that I mentioned earlier in the description below, along with the national security sit reps that I put out on Substack. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.